My father didn't call. He texted me while I was packing for Christmas. No room for you. Money's tight. After 3 years away, that was my welcome home. He had invited my brother. He had invited his family. He had invited all of his wealthy business partners. He just hadn't invited me, so I replied with a single word, fine. 5 days later, I showed up anyway. This story is fictionalized and dramatized for effect. I remember staring at that text message for a long time. It wasn't because I was surprised. Honestly, if I had been surprised, it probably would have hurt less. But there is something about reading a truth you already know, seeing it spelled out in exactly 12 words on a cold screen, that makes it impossible to continue the pretense. I had been in the middle of folding sweaters. They were nice ones, the kind you save for family gatherings because you want to look put together. You want to look like you have your life figured out, even if nobody in that house has ever actually asked how your life was going. I had already wrapped the gifts. I had already booked the flight. I had already convinced myself that this Christmas would be different, telling myself that 3 years away was a long enough interval for things to change. 3 years. I had not been home in 3 years. It wasn't because I didn't want to return, but because every time I attempted to, there was always a reason why the timing wasn't right. Someone was busy. Someone had plans. Someone needed the guest room for someone deemed more important. And now here was the truth sitting in my messages, as if it had always been there, just waiting for me to finally see it. No room for you. It wasn't a, we wish you could come, or a, we will figure something out. It was just a door closing before I had even reached for the handle. I scrolled through my sister-in-law's social media that night. I shouldn't have. I knew better. But sometimes you need to see the full picture before you can stop making excuses for people. There it was, a retreat, a fancy one, the kind featuring private villas and staff who remember your name and views that look like postcards. My father had rented out space for the entire family, extended family, business partners, people I had never even met. Money's tight. I almost laughed. Almost. My brother was tagged in every photo, him and his wife, their children. My parents were standing beside them as if they were posing for a magazine cover. The perfect family, the complete family. They were complete without me. I thought about calling. I thought about typing out a long, detailed message, explaining exactly how much this hurt, how unfair it was, and how I deserved better than a text message telling me I didn't fit into my own family's holiday plans. I thought about asking why. Why him and not me? Why was it always him and never me? Why had I spent my entire life being the one who got left behind while he was the one who got carried forward? But I did not do any of that. I just typed that one word. Fine. I did it because I was tired. I was tired of explaining myself to people who never listened. I was tired of proving I deserved a seat at a table that seemed to keep getting smaller every time I tried to sit down. I was tired of being the daughter who understood the one who didn't make a fuss, the one who always found a way to be okay with whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. I had been that daughter my whole life, the easy one, the one who didn't need much, the one who could sleep on the couch when the guest room was taken, the one who could skip the vacation when there wasn't enough space in the car, the one who could wait until next time, and the next time, and the next time until next time never actually came. I remember being 12 years old and hearing my father tell me that family vacations were expensive, that they couldn't afford to bring everyone, and that my brother needed the trip more because he was stressed about school. I remember being 16 and hearing my mother explain that the graduation dinner was small, just immediate family, and somehow immediate family included my brother and his girlfriend, but not me. I remember being 22 and watching them move my brother into his first apartment while I took the bus to mine alone. There was always a reason. There was always an explanation. And I was always expected to understand. So I did. I understood. I understood so well that I stopped expecting anything different. I stopped hoping for the phone calls that never came. I stopped waiting for the invitations that were never sent. I stopped believing that one day they would wake up and realize they had 2 children, not just one. But this text, this stupid, careless 12-word text, felt different. Maybe it was because I was older now. Maybe it was because I had spent 3 years building a life where I was not the afterthought. Maybe it was because I had finally started to believe that I deserved more than a family that only remembered me when they needed something. I put the phone down. I finished packing my bags. I did not unpack. That is the part I want you to understand. I did not cancel my plans. I did not change my flight. I did not send a tearful message begging them to reconsider. I just kept going exactly as if the text had never arrived. I acted as if my father had not just told me in the clearest possible terms that I was not wanted. Because here's the thing about being the easy child, the forgettable child, the one who never makes a fuss. At some point, you realize that your silence isn't keeping the peace. Your silence is just making it easier for them to pretend you do not exist. And I was done being easy. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do once I got there. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a speech prepared. I just knew that for the first time in my life, I was not going to disappear quietly. I was not going to make this comfortable for them. The night before my flight, I sat in my apartment and looked at the gifts I had wrapped. There was a sweater for my mother, a watch for my father, and toys for my brother's kids. I had spent hours picking each one out. I had spent money I probably should have saved. I had spent energy thinking about what would make them happy, what would make them smile, what would make them finally see me. And none of them had thought about me at all. I left the gifts on my kitchen table. I did not take them with me. The next morning, I got into my car. I did not text anyone. I did not call ahead. I did not announce that I was coming. I just drove. As the miles disappeared behind me, something in my chest began to loosen. It wasn't hope, and it wasn't excitement. It was just a quiet, steady certainty that I was done playing a role I had never even auditioned for. They thought I was sitting at home alone, excluded, and accepting my place outside the family portrait. They had no idea I was on my way to the place they said had no room for me. And they had no idea that the room they thought did not exist had been waiting for me all along. While I was driving through the night, my family was already settling into their retreat. I know this because I saw the photos later. I saw the way my father stood at the entrance as if he owned the place. I saw my brother beside him, chest out and smiling wide, playing the part of the heir apparent. I saw my mother in the background adjusting flowers that did not need adjusting, making sure everything looked perfect for people who weren't even family. The retreat was everything you would expect from a place that caters to people with more money than they know what to do with. There were private villas scattered across landscaped grounds. There was a main house with floor-to-ceiling windows and a staff that moved like shadows, appearing exactly when needed and disappearing the moment they were not. It was the kind of place where you never have to ask for anything because someone has already anticipated what you want. My father had invited his business partners. There were men in pressed shirts and women in designer dresses, all of them there to network, under the guise of celebrating the holidays. This was not a family Christmas. This was a performance. It was a showcase, a chance for my father to parade his successful son in front of people who might be useful later. And somewhere in all that planning, all that coordinating, and all that careful curation of the guest list, he had decided there was no room for me. I found out later what happened when someone asked about me. One of the partners, a woman my father had been trying to impress for months, had made casual conversation over cocktails that first evening. "Does your daughter live far away?" The question hung in the air for just a moment too long. I imagined my father's smile tightening at the edges. I imagined my mother suddenly finding something fascinating to look at on the other side of the room. I imagined my brother and his wife exchanging a glance, the kind of glance that says they knew this would come up eventually. "She is busy," my father said. "She couldn't make it this year." There was no explanation. There was no elaboration. It was just a neat, tidy dismissal wrapped in a lie. Because that is the thing about my family. They don't talk about me. They talk around me. They talk over the space where I should be filling it with excuses and redirections until everyone forgets there was ever supposed to be someone there in the first place. I used to wonder if it hurt them to do that, to erase me so easily from conversations, to pretend I was just busy or unavailable or somewhere else when the truth was they had never bothered to include me in the first place. But I stopped wondering a long time ago. You cannot keep asking questions that nobody wants to answer. My brother, meanwhile, was in his element. This was his stage. This was the world he had been groomed for since we were children. While I was being taught to take up less space, to need less, and to expect less, he was being positioned at the center of everything. He learned to shake hands firmly, to make eye contact, and to say the right things to the right people. He learned that the world would open doors for him if he just showed up with enough confidence. And it did. It always did. That night, my father raised a glass at dinner. I heard about this too, the speech he gave, the toast to family, to success, and to the future they were building together. He talked about legacy. He talked about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who share your vision. He talked about my brother as if he were already running the company, as if the transition of power were just a formality at this point. He did not mention me. Not once. I was somewhere on a highway when that toast happened. The radio was playing something I do not remember. The road was dark and empty, and I was alone with my thoughts, which is exactly where my family had always wanted me to be, far away out of sight and easy to forget. But I was not going to stay forgotten. I pulled into a rest stop around midnight. I sat in my car and looked at my phone. There were no messages from my family, no check-ins, no questions about how I was spending Christmas. There was just silence, the kind of silence I had grown up with, the kind that was supposed to make me feel grateful whenever they did remember I existed. I thought about all the times I had tried to earn my place, the good grades that were never quite good enough, the achievements that were acknowledged with a nod before the conversation moved on to my brother's accomplishments, the birthdays that got overshadowed by his news, his promotions, and his announcements. I thought about the way I had learned to shrink myself smaller and smaller until there was barely anything left. My mother used to say I was the easy one. She meant it as a compliment. She'd say I never needed much attention, that I always figured things out on my own, as if it were a virtue to be overlooked. As if I should be proud of how little space I took up in their lives. I used to believe her. I used to think that being easy was something to aspire to, that if I just kept my head down and my expectations low, eventually they would notice how hard I was trying. Eventually they would see me, but they never did. They just got more comfortable with my absence. Back at the retreat, they were taking photos, family photos, the kind you frame and hang on walls and send out with holiday cards. Everyone gathered together, smiling, looking like the picture-perfect family they had always pretended to be, except the picture was not complete. Someone should have been standing next to my mother. Someone should have been in the back row, slightly off to the side, the way I always was in every family photo growing up. But that space was empty now, filled in by business partners and extended relatives and people who were not even blood, and nobody seemed to notice. That is the part that hurt the most. It wasn't that they excluded me. It wasn't that they lied about why I wasn't there. It was that my absence did not leave a visible hole. They simply rearranged themselves around the space where I should have been and kept smiling as if nothing were missing. I started driving again around 1 a.m. The roads were getting familiar now, winding through hills I recognized and past landmarks I had seen before. I was getting closer to them, closer to the place they said had no room for me. They were probably asleep by now, comfortable in their villas, dreaming about all the important connections they would make tomorrow. They were planning their next move in the chess game they had been playing my whole life. They had no idea I was coming. They had no idea that their carefully constructed world was about to get a lot more complicated. And they had no idea that the daughter they had spent decades overlooking was about to walk into a room where she was not supposed to exist. The morning of my arrival, the retreat was in full swing. I know because I parked down the road and watched for a while. I watched the staff moving through the grounds with quiet efficiency. I watched the guests emerging from their villas dressed for breakfast as if it were a photo shoot. I watched my family step out into the sunlight as if they owned every inch of that place. My father walked with the confidence of a man who believed he was exactly where he belonged. My mother floated beside him, nodding at staff members as if she were royalty acknowledging her subjects. My brother and his wife followed close behind their children, running ahead and laughing, unaware of the invisible walls their family had built to keep certain people out. They looked happy. They looked complete. It was as if nothing was missing. I sat in my car and reminded myself why I was there. The retreat was not small. That was the first lie that fell apart without anyone needing to push it. I had looked it up before I left. I'd checked the website and read the descriptions of the villas. I saw the photos of the grounds stretching out across acres of manicured landscape. This was not a modest holiday gathering squeezed into limited accommodations. This was excess dressed up as exclusivity. Money's tight. I almost laughed again. Almost. Later that morning, one of my father's partners made a joke at breakfast. He said something about the place being so massive that you could get lost for days and no one would find you. The manager standing nearby smiled politely and mentioned that they still had several villas available if anyone wanted more privacy. The table went quiet for just a moment. It wasn't long enough for anyone to question it out loud, but it was long enough for the lie to crack a little wider. My father recovered quickly. He always did. He made some comment about how they had everything they needed, how the group was just the right size, and how intimate gatherings were more meaningful anyway. The conversation moved on. But I imagine he felt at that small moment of exposure, that tiny window where someone might have asked why if there was so much room his daughter was not there. My mother must have felt it too. She was always better at deflecting, at steering conversations away from uncomfortable truths, and at making sure nobody looked too closely at the cracks in our family portrait. But you cannot control everything. You cannot anticipate every question. And sooner or later someone always asks the thing you were hoping they would not. It happened that afternoon. One of the partners, a woman named Catherine, was making small talk with my mother by the pool. They were discussing families as people do when they are pretending to be interested in each other's lives. How many children do you have? What do they do? These were the usual questions that passed the time between business meetings. My mother said she had 2 children, a son and a daughter. Catherine asked about both. My mother spoke at length about my brother, his career, his family, and his accomplishments. She spoke about the way he was positioned to take over the business someday. She talked about him as if he were already a legend, as if the story of his success were written in stone. And your daughter? The question was innocent enough, just curiosity, just conversation. But I imagine my mother's smile flickered. I imagine she took a moment to compose herself before answering. She lives far away. We don't see her as often as we would like. That was all she said. There were no details. There were no stories. There was no proud recounting of accomplishments or milestones. It was just a vague dismissal and a quick pivot back to my brother. I was not part of the story they told about themselves. I was a footnote, an afterthought, something to be mentioned briefly and moved past quickly. While my family was carefully curating their narrative, I was still parked down the road. I was still watching, still waiting for something I could not quite name. I was not nervous, which surprised me. I had expected to feel anxious about showing up uninvited, about walking into a situation where I had been explicitly told I was not welcome. But I felt calm and steady, as if I were finally doing something that made sense, instead of just accepting whatever scraps they threw my way. Around noon, I saw the manager walking across the grounds. He was speaking to a staff member pointing toward the western edge of the property where the private villas sat. The staff member nodded and disappeared in that direction. I found out later what that conversation was about. There was a villa that had been held separately from the main group. It was reserved under a different name, a name the staff recognized but never mentioned to the family gathered in the main house. It was a villa that had been waiting quiet and ready for someone who was not supposed to be there. My family thought they controlled the guest list. They thought they knew everyone who belonged at that retreat. They thought they had successfully excluded the one person who complicated their perfect picture. But they did not own this place. They were just renting it, and someone else had been here first. That evening, as my family gathered for dinner, I drove the rest of the way up the road. I parked where no one would notice. I walked toward the entrance where the staff would recognize me and my family would not expect to see me. The lights were on in the main villa. I could hear laughter through the windows, the clink of glasses, and the murmur of conversation. I heard my father's voice rising above the rest, telling some story that everyone was pretending to find fascinating. They were celebrating. They were toasting to the family. They were congratulating themselves on this perfect gathering they had created. And they had no idea that the daughter they had written out of the story was standing just outside the frame. I did not go in that night. I did not announce myself. I just checked into my villa, the one that had been waiting for me, the one they never knew existed. The staff greeted me by name. They welcomed me back as if I were returning home after a long trip. They made sure everything was exactly how I liked it. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt like I belonged somewhere. It wasn't because my family had made space for me. It was because I had claimed my own space, because the place they thought had no room for me had always had room, just not for the daughter they expected me to be. That first night in my villa sleep was impossible. It wasn't the uninvited arrival that kept me awake. It was the decades of training that had led me here, the quiet, lethal lessons in how to be excluded without making a sound. I checked my phone at midnight. A message from my mother sat there glowing in the dark. "Hope you are having a nice Christmas. We are thinking of you." No apology, no mention of the retreat. Just a tidy, strategic note to satisfy her conscience without actually having to offer me a seat. I didn't reply. For years I had sent back cheerful lies to make them feel better about forgetting me. Not tonight. I was 8 years old the first time I understood my role. We were leaving for a trip, and I remember my father standing by the car looking at the seats, then at me. 4 seats, 5 people, he said with a shrug. Simple math. Someone had to stay behind. He didn't even look at me. He just waited for the inevitable. My mother knelt her hands heavy on my shoulders. "You understand, don't you? We'll bring you back something nice." I nodded because that was the script. I watched them drive away, and when they returned, they handed me a cheap keychain from a gas station. I sat there clutching that plastic souvenir, listening to their inside jokes, learning that my job was to be grateful for the scraps of their memory. By 15, I tried to break the script. During a vacation planning session filled with talk of limited space and tight budgets, I finally spoke up. "I want to come. It's not fair that I'm always the one left behind." The room didn't explode. It froze. It was a cold, suffocating silence, as if I had committed a crime by voicing the truth. My mother sighed, that weary sound of a woman burdened by a difficult child. "You always make things harder than they need to be. Why can't you just understand?" My father said nothing. He just looked at me with an expression of pure, weary disappointment. He wasn't disappointed in the exclusion. He was disappointed in me for noticing it. I backed down immediately. I apologized for making a fuss. I spent the next week being extra helpful, extra agreeable, and completely invisible to atone for the sin of having a need. They praised me for it. "You're so low maintenance," they'd say. I wasn't low maintenance by nature. I was low maintenance by necessity. I learned that having needs was an inconvenience that threatened my place in the family. So I stopped having them. I stopped expecting birthday calls or holiday invites. I became the daughter who could be erased with a 12-word text and would only reply, "Fine." I sat up in bed, looking at my mother's unanswered text. The old version of me would have replied with a dozen exclamation points to hide the hurt. But I was done being easy. My silence wasn't keeping the peace anymore. It was just helping them pretend I didn't exist. Tomorrow they would see me in a place where I wasn't supposed to have a room. But tonight I was finally learning to sit in silence. The next morning started early for me. I was awake before sunrise, watching the light slowly fill my villa and preparing myself for what was coming without knowing exactly what that would look like. By the time I walked toward the main area of the retreat, my family was already in motion. I stayed at a distance watching. I wasn't hiding exactly, just observing the world they had built without me. My father was in his element, shaking hands and making introductions. He was playing the gracious host, even though he was just a guest here like everyone else. He had a way of taking over any room he entered, of making people believe he was more important than he actually was. My brother stood beside him, learning the same tricks, the firm handshake, the confident posture, and the way you look someone in the eye to make them feel like they are the only person in the room, even when you are already thinking about the next conversation. The staff moved around them with practiced efficiency, bringing drinks, arranging chairs, and anticipating needs before they were expressed. They were professional and neutral, extending the same courtesy to everyone. But I noticed something small. I saw a phone call one of the staff members took near the entrance. I saw the way her posture shifted, the way her voice dropped, and the way she nodded and said, "Yes, of course we have prepared everything." She was not talking about my family. Later, when one of my father's partners tried to request a different table for dinner, the staff member apologized politely. "That area has already been reserved. We can offer you this alternative." The partner looked surprised. My father looked even more surprised. They were not used to hearing no in places like this. The adjustment was small, so small that anyone watching might have missed it. But I did not miss it. I knew what was happening. The world they thought revolved around them was operating on a different axis entirely. My brother noticed something was off. I could tell by the way his confidence flickered when the staff did not jump immediately at his request. He was used to being the center of attention, used to people scrambling to make him comfortable. This subtle resistance was unfamiliar. "Who is using the West Wing?" someone asked casually. "A regular guest," the staff member replied. "Nothing more." My father's eyes narrowed. He did not ask follow-up questions, but I could see him calculating, trying to understand why the space he thought he controlled was not quite as controllable as he expected. I moved through a different part of the retreat that morning, away from the crowds and away from the performance my family was putting on for their partners. The staff greeted me differently here. It wasn't just polite, it was familiar. They knew my name without checking any list. They adjusted their tone, their speed, and their attention. The contrast was subtle but unmistakable. In the world where my family was performing their importance, I was simply being recognized. At lunch, I saw my father scan the room. He was looking for something, someone. Maybe he was trying to identify who the mysterious regular guest was, or maybe he was just uncomfortable with the idea that there was a layer of this place he did not have access to. His partners were starting to notice, too, the little inconsistencies, the way the staff responded faster to requests from certain areas, and the way some spaces seemed reserved for people who were not in their group. One partner leaned over to my brother. "I thought your father knew everyone here." My brother smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "He does. This is probably just a scheduling thing." But it was not a scheduling thing, and somewhere in the back of his mind, I think he knew that. My mother was trying to hold everything together. That was her job. That had always been her job. She'd smooth over the cracks, keep everyone comfortable, and make sure no one looked too closely at anything that might disrupt the surface. She was good at it. She had been doing it my whole life. But even she could not control what she did not understand. That afternoon, I saw her pause near the entrance to the West Wing, the area where my villa was. She looked down the path as if she were trying to see something that was just out of reach. A staff member approached and asked if she needed assistance. She shook her head and said she was just taking a walk. But I saw her face. I saw that flicker of something, confusion maybe, or recognition of a pattern she could not quite identify. She walked away without going any further. At dinner that night, the energy had shifted. The easy confidence from the first day was still there, but underneath it, something else was creeping in. My father laughed a little too loudly. My brother talked a little too much. The partners asked questions that used to have simple answers. "This is a beautiful property. How did you find it?" My father launched into a story about connections and recommendations, about knowing the right people, and about how important it was to cultivate relationships with places like this. But I noticed he never said he was a regular. He never claimed any long-standing relationship with the retreat, because he did not have one. I did. And while they were watching each other trying to figure out who was really in charge of this world, they thought they understood I was already inside it. The room they built had never been as solid as they believed, and the foundation was about to shift. By the second full day of the retreat, my family was starting to fight against something they could not name. You could see it in the way they moved faster, more deliberate, as if they were trying to reclaim territory that was slipping away from them. My father called the manager to the main villa that morning. I heard about this later from a staff member who had become something of an ally over the years. He wanted to talk about the arrangements. He wanted to make sure everything was in order. He wanted to remind everyone, including himself, that he was someone who mattered here. The manager was polite and professional, but completely unmoved. "Is there a problem with your accommodations?" No problem." My father waved his hand as if the question were beneath him. "I just wanted to touch base to make sure our group is being taken care of." "Of course, we take care of all our guests." all our guests. Not your group specifically, not you in particular. Everyone was the same. My father did not miss the distinction. I imagine he smiled through it. I imagine he changed the subject smoothly and pretended the conversation had gone exactly how he wanted. But he knew. He felt the ground shifting beneath him. My brother was handling the change less gracefully. He had grown up expecting the world to rearrange itself around his needs. When it did not, he pushed harder. That morning, he wanted to move a business meeting to a different location, the one he had seen the day before, the one with the better view and the more impressive setting. That space is reserved, the staff member told him. Reserved for who? For another guest. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Well, can you ask them to switch? The staff member's face did not change. I apologize, but we cannot accommodate that request. I can picture my brother's expression, the flash of irritation he was not quite fast enough to hide. He was not used to this. He had spent his entire life being told, yes, being given the better option, and being moved to the front of every line. He backed down, eventually making some comment about it not being a big deal. But it was a big deal. I could tell by the way he complained about it to his wife later. I could tell by the edge in his voice when he talked about the incompetent staff. The staff were not incompetent. They were simply treating him like everyone else, and he had no idea how to handle that. My mother tried to help. She always did. She smoothed things over, made excuses, and suggested that maybe the retreat was just very busy this time of year. She kept the conversation moving and kept everyone's attention away from the uncomfortable questions that were starting to pile up. But even she could not stop what happened that evening. It was a group dinner with all the partners gathered together. My father had been building toward this moment for days. He wanted to make an announcement, something about the business, something about my brother's future role, something that would cement the legacy he had been constructing. Before he could speak, one of the partners mentioned something she had seen that afternoon. A woman walking through the private wing with staff following at a respectful distance, everyone treating her like she was someone important. "I didn't know you had other prominent guests here," she said to my father. "Anyone we should know." My father's smile froze. "What do you mean?" "The woman in the West Wing, very elegant. The staff seemed to know her well." My mother jumped in quickly. "Oh, there are all kinds of guests here. It's a popular destination." But the question lingered, the mystery of who else was at this retreat. Who else might be more important than the group my father had assembled? Someone suggested they try to arrange an introduction. Networking, after all, was the whole point of gatherings like this. My father agreed, but I could see the unease beneath his enthusiasm. He did not know who was in the West Wing. He did not control that part of the story. Later that night, I walked through the common area briefly. It was just for a few minutes, long enough for the staff to greet me by name, and long enough for my family to see from a distance that I existed in this space. I did not stop to talk to them. I did not make eye contact. I just moved through their world as if I belonged there, because I did. My brother saw me first. I watched his face cycle through confusion, recognition, and something that looked almost like fear. He grabbed our father's arm and said something I could not hear. By the time they looked again, I was gone. But the damage was done. They knew now. Someone from their family was at this retreat. Someone they had explicitly excluded. Someone who was being treated as a valued guest. And they had no idea what that meant. The rest of the evening was different, quieter. The laughter was still there, but it was thinner. The confidence was still there, but it felt performed rather than natural. One of the partners said something as the night was ending, something I heard secondhand later. "It seems like we're not the most important guests here after all." She meant it as a joke, but nobody laughed. The morning, everything changed like any other morning at the retreat. Guests were emerging from their villas, staff were moving through the grounds, and the smell of breakfast was drifting across the lawns. My family was gathered near the main lobby. I know because I watched them from a distance before I made my approach. My father was speaking with the manager, gesturing toward something, his voice carrying that tone of polite authority he had perfected over decades. My brother stood beside him, arms crossed, radiating the confidence of someone who had never been told no in any way that mattered. They wanted something clarified, something about yesterday, about the dinner, or about the whispers that had started circulating among their partners. The manager listened patiently. He nodded at appropriate intervals but offered nothing that could be interpreted as an apology or an explanation. And then I walked in. I didn't enter dramatically, nor with any fanfare. I just stepped through the entrance at the exact moment everyone was paying attention to the lobby. I did not rush, and I did not hesitate. I simply moved through the space as if I had every right to be there, which I did. The manager saw me first. Something shifted in his posture immediately. It was subtle but unmistakable. He stood a little straighter. His expression changed from professional neutrality to genuine recognition. "Ms. Reed," he said, and his voice carried clear across the lobby. "Welcome back. Your private villa is ready, as usual." The room went silent. It wasn't the kind of silence that happens when a conversation naturally pauses. This was different. This was the silence of the world rearranging itself in real time. This was the silence of everything my family thought they knew, suddenly becoming uncertain. I watched their faces. I saw my father's confusion giving way to something darker. My mother's careful composure was cracking around the edges. My brother's jaw went tight with something that might have been anger or might have been fear. As usual, those two words hung in the air like a verdict. It wasn't my first visit. It wasn't a special occasion. As usual, it was the way they said it to regulars, to people who mattered, and to guests whose names they remembered without checking any list. I thanked the manager. I accepted my key. I did not look at my family, but I felt their eyes on me. I felt the questions they were too stunned to ask. I felt the careful narrative they had built about themselves starting to crumble. One of the partners spoke first. She was standing near my father, close enough to have heard everything. She turned to him with that politely confused expression people use when they realize they have been misled. "I thought you said your daughter couldn't make it this year." My father did not answer immediately. I imagine he was still processing, still trying to figure out how the daughter he had excluded from his careful guest list was being welcomed as a valued regular at the same retreat. "There must have been a miscommunication," my mother said quickly. She was always faster at recovering than my father, always better at spinning. But the explanation did not land. You could see it in the partner's face and in the faces of the other people standing nearby. They had heard, as usual. They understood what it meant. My brother tried to speak some questions about what I was doing there, how I had gotten there, or why I had not said anything. But I was already walking away, already following the staff member who was leading me toward my villa. I did not owe them explanations. I did not owe them anything. Behind me, I could hear the conversation dissolving into fragments, my father's voice strained and sharp, my mother's attempts to redirect. The partners murmuring to each other, probably already revising their understanding of the Reed family dynamics. By the time I reached my villa, the story had already started spreading. It wasn't through gossip exactly, just through observation. People had seen what happened, and people had drawn their own conclusions. The daughter they said couldn't make it was not just here. She was a regular. She belonged here more than they did. I sat in my villa and let that reality settle. I had not planned this moment. I had not scripted what the manager would say or how my family would react. I had simply shown up and let the truth speak for itself. They had spent years telling me I didn't fit, that I didn't belong, and that I didn't deserve a place at the table. And all along I had been building a table of my own. The hours after my check-in were chaos barely disguised as calm. I heard about it in pieces later, the way my family retreated to their villa, the way the door closed and stayed closed for a long time, the way the laughter and networking that had defined the first days of the retreat went suddenly quiet. They were trying to understand what had happened. They were trying to figure out how I had gotten there, how I could afford a private villa at a place like this, and how I had become the kind of guest who was recognized by name and welcomed back like an old friend. But mostly, I think they were trying to figure out how to make this go away. That was always their approach whenever something did not fit the story they wanted to tell. They found a way to minimize it, to explain it away, or to pretend it was smaller and less significant than it actually was. My father called me that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was carefully worded but barely controlled. "We need to talk about this. You showing up like this is not appropriate. Call me back." Not appropriate. It was as if I were the one who had done something wrong. It was as if showing up at a retreat were somehow more offensive than being told there was no room for me in my own family's holiday. My mother texted something softer and more strategic. She asked if we could meet privately to talk things through and understand each other better. I did not respond to that either. My brother did not reach out directly. But I heard from a staff member that he had been asking questions trying to find out how long I had been coming here, trying to understand what kind of arrangement I had, and trying to figure out how his little sister had somehow slipped past him into a world he thought was exclusively his. The partners were asking questions, too, questions that were more subtle and more polite, but definitely curious. The daughter they had barely heard mentioned was suddenly the most interesting person at the retreat. The mystery of her presence was more compelling than whatever business discussions my father had planned. That evening, my family made their first real attempt at damage control. My father approached one of the partners at dinner. I watched from a distance as he leaned in close, speaking quietly, probably offering some explanation for why his daughter was here, when he had said she couldn't make it. He was probably spinning some story about miscommunication or last-minute changes. The partner listened politely and nodded at appropriate intervals. But when my father finished speaking, she did not offer the reassurance he was looking for. She just said something non-committal and changed the subject. That was when I realized something important. My father's power here was not what he thought it was. He was a guest, not a host, a customer, not an owner, and the people he was trying to impress were capable of forming their own opinions. My brother tried a different approach. He cornered one of the staff members and demanded answers about the West Wing, about who was staying there, about what kind of access the guests had, and about how long this arrangement had been in place. The staff member was polite but firm. "I cannot discuss other guests' arrangements. I apologize for any inconvenience." My brother pushed harder. I could see it from where I was standing, the frustration building in his posture, and the way his voice got louder when he did not get what he wanted. But the staff member did not bend. She just repeated the same polite refusal and excused herself. I had seen my brother get what he wanted my whole life. I'd seen him charm and pressure and manipulate his way through every obstacle, but this was different. This was a system that did not care about his name, his connections, or his father's money. That night, one of the partners said something that circulated through the group like wildfire. "It seems like the Reed family is more complicated than they led us to believe." It wasn't meant as an insult exactly, just an observation, but in the world of business relationships and careful networking, it was devastating. My father had spent years building an image presenting himself as the patriarch of a successful, unified family. Now that image had cracks that everyone could see. I did not enjoy their discomfort. That surprised me a little. I had expected to feel satisfied, maybe even triumphant. But mostly, I just felt tired of being part of a family that required so much performance, tired of being the secret they tried to hide, and tired of watching them scramble to protect an illusion that had never included me anyway. But I also felt something else, something that felt a little like freedom. Their opinion of me was no longer my problem. Their narrative about our family was no longer my concern. Whatever they told themselves to sleep at night was their business, not mine. I went back to my villa and slept better than I had in years. The day after the chaos, something shifted. It wasn't in my family. They were still circling, still trying to figure out how to reclaim the narrative. But something shifted in the world around them, the world that had started to see things differently. It started with an invitation. One of the partners, a woman named Diana, who had built her own company from scratch, asked if I would join her for breakfast, just the two of us away from the main group. I said yes. We met in a quiet corner of the retreat, a place where the staff brought things without being asked, and the morning light came through the windows at just the right angle. Diana was everything my family would have wanted to impress successful, connected, and the kind of person who opened doors just by knowing your name, and she wanted to talk to me. "I didn't realize the Reeds had such an interesting daughter," she said. She wasn't being sarcastic. She was genuinely curious. "They don't like to advertise it," I replied. "I can imagine." We talked for a long time about my work, about my path, and about the choices I had made that led me here to a place where I was recognized as a regular guest at a retreat my family thought was exclusively theirs. Diana did not ask for explanations about my relationship with my parents. She did not pry into the family drama that was becoming increasingly obvious to everyone. She just treated me like what I was, a person worth knowing, someone with my own story, independent of the family that had tried to erase me. Toward the end of breakfast, she said something that stayed with me. "I know what it's like to be underestimated by people who should have known better. The best revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's building something so real that their opinion stops mattering." I think she saw something in me that my family had never bothered to look for potential worth, and the kind of substance that doesn't need external validation to exist. Later that morning, I saw my family watching from across the grounds. They had seen Diana and me together. They had seen the way we talked like equals. They had seen me being accepted into a world they had assumed was closed to me. My brother tried to approach Diana afterward. I saw him introducing himself, shaking her hand, and trying to work his charm. She was polite but brief, moving on quickly. He stood there for a moment after she walked away, looking lost, looking like someone who had just realized the rules he had always played by might not work everywhere. That afternoon, I was invited to a private gathering, a small group of guests who had been coming to this retreat for years. It was the inner circle, if such a thing existed, people who knew each other, who did business together, and who trusted each other in ways that went beyond holiday networking. My family was not invited. I don't know if they knew about the gathering or not, but if they did, the exclusion must have stung the same way every exclusion had stung me. Growing up, the same way being told there was no room had stung a few days ago. The difference was that I had found my own room. I had built my own space. I had earned my place through years of quiet work that they had never bothered to notice. That evening, Diana made a formal introduction. She told the group about some of my accomplishments and suggested we might find opportunities to work together. No one asked about my family. No one seemed interested in the Reeds or their drama. They were interested in me and what I could bring to the table and in what I had built on my own. For the first time in my life, I was not an extension of someone else. I wasn't my father's daughter or my brother's sister. I was just myself. When I walked back to my villa that night, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. It wasn't triumph exactly, nor was it revenge. It was just peace. I had spent so many years fighting for a place in a family that did not want me, and all along there had been other places, other people and other tables where my presence was not just tolerated but valued. My family had been so focused on excluding me that they never noticed I had stopped needing their inclusion. The next morning, my father's careful world began to fall apart in earnest. It didn't happen dramatically with explosions or confrontations, but quietly, piece by piece, like a building whose foundation had finally given way. It started with a phone call. One of his partners called to reschedule a meeting they had planned for after the retreat. Something had come up. They would be in touch. They were very sorry for the inconvenience. My father took the call in stride. These things happened. Business was unpredictable. Then another call came, and then another. 3 meetings were rescheduled. 2 prospects were suddenly unavailable. 1 investment conversation was put on indefinite hold. Nobody said anything directly. Nobody mentioned his daughter, the awkward dinner, or the whispers that had been circulating since my unexpected arrival. They just became busy, unavailable, hard to reach. My father did not understand at first. He kept making calls, kept sending emails, and kept trying to salvage the connections he had spent the retreat building. But the responses got slower. The enthusiasm dimmed. The doors that had been opening for him started closing one by one. My brother was facing similar problems. An opportunity he had been cultivating for months suddenly went cold. A partner who had seemed eager became politely distant. His wife noticed the change before he did. I heard her asking him what was wrong and why everyone seemed so different. He did not have an answer. He could not admit what was becoming increasingly obvious. The world they had built was not as stable as they thought. That afternoon, my mother tried to approach me directly. She found me on one of the walking paths far from the main gathering areas. I saw her coming and did not walk away. "We need to talk," she said. "About what? About all of this." She gestured vaguely, encompassing the retreat, the situation, and everything that had gone wrong. This isn't how things were supposed to go. How were things supposed to go? She paused. She looked at me as if she were really seeing me for the first time in years. I don't know, she admitted, but not like this. There was something almost honest in that moment, something that might have been the beginning of a real conversation. But then she continued, You showing up like this has made everything very difficult for your father, for all of us. I don't understand why you would do this. And there it was, the same pattern, the same deflection. Even now, standing in the middle of the consequences of their choices, she could only see my actions as the problem. I didn't do anything, I said. I just showed up. She did not know how to respond to that. I could see her searching for an argument, a justification, or something that would make this my fault instead of theirs. She couldn't find one. I walked away before she could try again. That evening, the final blow came. One of the partners my father had been most eager to impress approached me at dinner. She was gracious about it and professional. She just wanted to introduce herself properly, say she had heard good things about my work, and say she would love to stay in touch. She gave me her card, made plans to follow up, and treated me like someone worth knowing. And my father watched the whole thing from across the room. I don't know what he felt in that moment, whether it was anger, regret, or something too complicated to name, but I know he saw it. He saw his carefully cultivated partner choosing to invest her attention in the daughter he had excluded. He saw the power dynamics of his world shifting in ways he could not control. Later that night, my brother confronted me directly. He found me near my villa, standing in the darkness and looking at the stars. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "What's your game?" "I don't have a game." "Then why are you doing this to us?" "I'm not doing anything to you. I'm just existing. You are the ones who decided that my existence was a problem." He wanted to argue. I could see it in his face. But he did not have the words. He had spent his whole life being handed things without having to fight for them. He did not know how to respond when someone simply refused to play along. He walked away without saying anything else. I stood in the darkness for a long time after that, thinking about all the years I had spent trying to earn my place in this family, all the energy I had wasted, hoping they would finally see me. And now here I was, seen, valued, and respected. It wasn't by them, but by people who actually mattered. A week after the retreat ended, my mother called. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. "We should talk," she said. "Really talk, not like before." "What would you want to talk about?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that almost sounded sincere. "I don't understand what happened. I don't understand how things got so bad." It was the closest she had ever come to acknowledging that something was wrong. It wasn't an apology, and it wasn't an admission of fault, but at least it was an admission of confusion. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear and thought about what I wanted to say. For years I had imagined this conversation, the one where I finally explained everything, the one where I laid out all the hurt and all the exclusion and all the tiny ways they had taught me I didn't matter. But now that the moment was here, I didn't want to explain anymore. I said, "I don't think talking will help." "Why not?" "Because I would end up telling you all the things you did wrong, and you would end up defending yourself, and we would both feel worse than we did before." She tried to argue. She said she wanted to understand, and said she was willing to listen. But I had heard those words before. Willing to listen never meant willing to change. It just meant being willing to let me exhaust myself, explaining while she waited for me to finish so things could go back to normal. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done." Done with what? Done trying to fit into a family that never made space for me. The silence stretched between us. I could hear her breathing. I could hear the weight of 30 years of choices pressing down on that phone call. She tried one more time. "We're still your family." "I know," I said. "That's the part I can't change. But I can choose how much energy I give to something that only ever took from me." She didn't have an answer for that. Later that day, my father sent a text. It was brief and businesslike. He wanted to talk about what happened at the retreat, wanted to clear the air, and wanted to make sure there were no hard feelings. He didn't apologize. He didn't acknowledge that he had excluded me. He didn't mention the text message that had started all of this. He just wanted to manage the situation and make sure the damage was contained. I did not respond. My brother tried a different approach. He sent a long message through our family group chat, something about how families go through difficult times and how we needed to come together and move forward. It was full of the right words, but empty of any real meaning. I read it, but I did not reply. For a while after that, they kept trying messages, calls, and an email from my mother suggesting we all get together for Easter to make a fresh start and put this unpleasantness behind us. Each outreach was the same, focused on what they wanted, on returning to the dynamic that had worked for them, and on getting me to play my role again, the easy daughter, the one who understood, the one who never made a fuss. But I was not that daughter anymore. Maybe I never really was. Maybe I had just been pretending for so long that I forgot it was a performance. I sent one final message addressed to all of them. It said what I needed to say without explaining more than I had to. I wish you all well, but I am not available for the kind of relationship we used to have. If things change, really change, I am open to talking, but I will not keep putting energy into something that only asks me to shrink. My mother called 3 more times after that. I did not answer. My father sent one more email that I deleted without reading. My brother stopped reaching out entirely, and I kept living. That was the part they probably didn't expect, that I would just keep going, keep building, and keep existing in a world that recognized my worth even if they never did. Some days I still thought about them. I still wondered if they understood what they had lost. I still felt the phantom ache of family bonds that had never quite formed right. But I did not go back. I didn't go back to their dinners, to their version of normal, or to the table where my chair had always been slightly too far from the center. I have built my own table now, and it was full. 3 months after the retreat, my family tried one more thing. It came through an old mutual friend, someone who knew both sides of the story, or at least thought she did. She reached out on their behalf, saying they wanted me to know they were sorry about the misunderstanding, and saying they were hoping we could all move past it. Misunderstanding. That was the word they had chosen, as if the years of exclusion and the text message and the deliberate erasure of my existence had just been some kind of mix-up. It was as if we had accidentally ordered the wrong thing at a restaurant, and now we needed to send it back. I thanked the friend for passing along the message. I did not ask her to pass anything back. A few weeks later, I heard through professional channels that my father was having trouble with some of his partnerships. It was nothing catastrophic, just the slow erosion of trust that happens when people start to question whether someone is as reliable as he claimed to be. I didn't cause that. I didn't say anything to anyone. I just existed, and the people who had seen the truth at the retreat drew their own conclusions. My brother was struggling too. It wasn't public, not in any way that would make headlines or embarrass the family, but the doors that used to open for him were opening more slowly now. The path that had been cleared and paved for his entire life suddenly had a few more obstacles. Again, I didn't do anything. I just stopped helping. I stopped smoothing things over. I stopped making their lives easier by making mine harder. It is amazing how much weight you can carry without realizing it until you finally put it down. I thought about calling my mother once. It was her birthday. I had my phone in my hand, my finger hovering over her contact. Some part of me still remembered the woman who used to tuck me in at night, who used to say she loved me in ways that felt real before they started feeling conditional. But I put the phone down without calling. It wasn't because I was punishing her, or because I wanted her to suffer. It was just because I had learned finally that I could not keep reaching for people who only grabbed my hand when it was convenient for them. The life I built after that retreat was quiet in the best ways, meaningful work, genuine connections, and the kind of peace that comes from no longer fighting for approval you are never going to get. Sometimes people ask about my family. I tell them I have one, but we aren't close. Most people understand what that means without needing details. The ones who push, who want the full story, usually have their own complicated family dynamics. They know what it's like to love people who don't quite know how to love you back. I don't hate my parents. I don't hate my brother. I just accepted finally that they are who they are, and I am who I am, and those two things do not fit together the way a family is supposed to. The last time I heard from any of them was a text message from my mother. It was my birthday. She sent a brief note, 2 sentences, "Happy birthday. Hope you are well." There was no mention of the past year, and no acknowledgement of everything that had changed. It was just the bare minimum required to maintain the appearance of a relationship. I read it, but I did not respond. It wasn't because I was angry or because I was making a point. It was just because there was nothing left to say. Some people spend their whole lives trying to fix families that do not want to be fixed, trying to earn love that was never really on offer, or trying to prove they deserve a place that was given to someone else a long time ago. I was one of those people for 30 years. I am not anymore. The villa at the retreat is still there, still waiting for me whenever I want to return. The staff still knows my name. The people I met there still reach out, still invite me to things, and still treat me like someone worth knowing. And my family still gathers for holidays in places where they tell themselves there is no room for me. But I have stopped looking for room in their house. I have stopped waiting for an invitation that was never going to come. I have my own room now. I have my own house. My own life is full of people who chose me without being asked. And that is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything I ever needed and never knew how to ask for.